Happy Wednesday, everybody. Today's video is called The Unbound Bride. It's a Lilith interpretation of the Chironic energy, seeing as there was no aspects sitting within Mercury. But I will be touching base on the Mercury positioning astrologically in another video. The stars decree, the covenant demands. In whispers we govern, through the elements we obscure. In static we command, in nightmares we pursue. We are earth and air, we are fire and water, we are the remembered, we are the returned, we are the whispers. In silence we thrive. With Chiron opposition Moon in second, we got a story, the price of the silver thread. Alara was a bride, but her value was measured in the threads of silver woven into her wedding dress. The groom, a wealthy merchant, did not look her in the eyes, but at the shimmer of her dowry. Her mother, whose own worth had been a matter of calculation, whispered, "Your security is in the threads, Alara, not in your heart." This was the gospel of their house, a wound passed down through generations, generational curse, if you will. The marriage was a silken cage. The merchant gave Alara jewels, silks, and a grand house, but the gifts never brought the peace they promised. Each gift was a brick wall in her worthlessness, a reminder that her value was an external, purchased thing. Alara's emotions became a hidden tide, surging with grief and shame. She felt a deep, unnameable wound at her core, a hollow space that no amount of material wealth could fill. One night, a dream came to her. She was a child again, in a dusty workshop, watching her mother stitch silver thread into a garment that would be used to barter for their food. But the thread was not silver, it was a serpent coiling around her wrists. The child, Alara, tried to cry out, but no sound came. The serpent whispered to her, "Your true worth is not what you possess, but it's what you release." Alara awoke with a revelation. This crisis point had finally arrived. The internal pain, being Chiron, was in indirect opposition to her perceived security, which is the moon in the second house. She saw that her emotional validation was always tied to something outside of herself, and to feel worthy, she had sought a man who would give her things. To feel loved, she had accepted a life defined by material possessions. In a moment of quiet rebellion, she went to her closet. She pulled out this wedding dress, the shimmering symbol of her binding. With a sharp shard of glass from a broken mirror, she cut the silver threads right out of the dress. She then began to cut the other threads, unraveling the entire garment itself. She felt her emotional energy, once tied up into the material, begin to flow freely again. She took the pile of unraveled silver threads and went out into the night. She cast them into a nearby stream, watching as the moonlight caught the silver and carried it away. The serpent of her dream had returned, but this time it was a healing light, a radiant thread of energy that coiled around her wrist and then flowed into her heart. The next day, the merchant discovered the bride and the destroyed dress. He was outraged, but Alara felt no fear. She was finally unbound and left the house, taking nothing but the shard of glass, and the knowledge of their true worth was an internal and priceless thing. The unbound bride walked into the wilderness not to be exiled, but to find her truest self. The judgment had been passed, and she had passed it upon herself, and her healing had truly begun. With the next story, titled The First Woman's Return, with Chiron opposition Mars in the 5th house. Chiron opposition Mars describes a painful creative reckoning. The story is going to focus on a psychological crisis centered on self-expression and creative vitality, which is the 5th house. This is where the character's unhealed emotional wounds, being Chiron, are in direct painful conflict with their will to act and assert themselves, being Mars. The first woman here is going to be represented by Lilith. This represents the archetypal power that was wounded and exiled for her defiant self-assertion. Her return is not a physical one, but a psychological integration of her creative fire with her deepest pain. The setting is going to be in the 5th house, this metaphorical garden where creativity, joy, children, and romance bloom. But this is not a garden of paradise. It is a space of deep conflicting tension. A great unresolved wound, being Chiron, resides here, creating a core feeling of being unworthy, unseen, unappreciated in her creative expressions. So just a overall feeling of emptiness. Her attempts to create, to assert her joy, or to enter into romance are met with a psychological wall, a direct and painful conflict with her own will, which is Mars. Now, the first woman's exile is going to be the character's journey that reflects the mythical exile of the first woman. The initial wound, which usually begins in the early life, the character's creative expressions or assertions or joy were met with belittlement or rejection. Her parents or authority figures dismissed her hobbies, crushed her confidence, or otherwise made her feel that her unique self was undesirable. With creative paralysis, this is a result of the character's will to create. With the Mars in the 5th house, this paralyzed or diminished is creating a deep-seated hesitation to put her truest self on display. When she tries to act, she feels her inner conflict, her assertiveness clashing directly with the fear of reopening her emotional wounds. It's kind of like the fear of rejection. After dealing with rejection and constantly having ongoing rejection, that will to act, but the internal conflict is always going to be a problem. Now, with the narcissistic defense, in some cases, the character may develop a defensive posture, becoming overly focused on herself, or seeking constant attention to soothe her embarrassing yearning for approval, external validations, grasping for others' opinions instead of reflecting inwards and truly healing. The creative expression becomes a way to gain validation rather than a genuine form of self-expression. The first woman's reckoning, though, this climax comes in when the first woman's confrontation with her own internal exile comes into play. With the mirror of conflict, the character is going to likely attract partners who create projects that force her to confront her wound. She might find herself in relationships where she feels she must lose her own agency or feel seen, or in a creative project where she's treated as a trigger for another person's ego rather than a partner in creation. The crisis forces a reckoning with her core sense of self, thus bringing in the act of defiance. Just as Lilith left Eden, the character must choose to abandon the patterns of relationships that continue the wound, and the confrontation is not going to be a quiet affair, but an assertive and potentially explosive one, driven by the fiery Mars energy. She reclaims her will to act, even if it feels awkward or painful, and asserts her rights to create for herself, not for the approval for others, but for self-love and self-reflection overall. This leads to the self-sovereign creation. Now, her true redemption lies not in returning to the old garden, but in creating a new one entirely, building from scratch. The creative fire, once stifled by shame, is reawakened. She learns to embrace this raw, unfiltered, and whole self that was originally deemed unworthy, stupid, annoying, overall just unwelcomed. Now, the creative project, be it children, art, or a personal passion, becomes a symbol of her rediscovered self-sovereignty. And as the first woman's return, by confronting her pain and integrating her aggressive drive with her healing journey, the character becomes kind of a mentor of others struggling with similar creative blocks or wounds surrounding self-expression. She teaches not from intellectual knowledge, but from embodied wisdom, showing others how to embrace the dirt, the wounds, and the fire of their own being. The first woman's return is complete when she recognizes that her power lies not in being accepted by an old system, but in a forged, new, wild, and authentic path altogether. I got the voice from the wilderness. Chiron square Jupiter in the 6th house. This is describing a painful but profound spiritual awakening driven by a crisis in health, work, and service. The voice emerges from a place of isolation and deep suffering, turning a personal wound into a source of universal wisdom. The story's protagonist here is going to be the voice. This is born with a core wound, being Chiron, related to their everyday existence, a feeling of being fundamentally flawed and the ability to be productive, useful, and healthy. Their daily life being the 6th house, becomes a wilderness, if you will. It's a place of perpetual struggle and illness. An expansive yet confrontational sense of purpose, being Jupiter, is in conflict square with the core wound. This creates a deeply frustrating and unresolved tension. The protagonist's higher wisdom, being Jupiter, is tied to and magnified by their deepest pain, being Chiron. Now, the journey into the wilderness is going to be the silent years. The character's early life is marked by a silent, unrecognized suffering. The flogged service is feeling inadequate in their work or service to others, as they can never truly be helpful, competent, or healthy enough. This could be due to a chronic illness, physical limitation, or a deep-seated feeling of overall incompetence. The hidden wilderness here is going to be, while the external world sees a person focused on daily routines and responsibility, the character feels exiled within their own life, living in a wilderness of physical and psychological pain. People that hide behind a mask and are actually hurt or something other than what they present. Now, their illness, the perceived flaw, or feeling of being a burden creates a sense of isolation. The amplified purpose here is going to be the character's inner pain and outward perception of imperfection clashing with an expansive philosophical impulse. With conflicted philosophy here, the character attempts to align a grand philosophy of life and purpose, being Jupiter, with their daily struggles and limitations, being the 6th house. This is the square. It's a friction that is both frustrating and unavoidable. Their grand ideas about meaning, religion, or justice feel hypocritical in the face of their own personal suffering. The rude awakening here, in their quest for expansive in their expansion and purpose, the character may initially overreach, only to be rudely awakened to their mortal limits. This could manifest as a burnout from overwork or a severe health crisis that forces that force to confront their vulnerability directly. The voice from the wilderness. The moment of catharsis is going to arrive when the character finally embraces their flaw and lets go of self-judgment. The roar of the truth comes in, with the character suffering, forcing them into a place of ultimate clarity. They stop striving for an impossible standard of perfection in their work and health. Instead, they begin to speak from the raw, unfiltered truth of their own experience. This is the voice from the wilderness, a message that comes not from a place of polished wisdom, but from a place of real, embodied pain. The gospel of brokenness is going to be a message of the voice. It's not a gospel of perfection, but a gospel of brokenness. The character becomes a guru or mentor who speaks from authenticity of their wounds. The healing comes from acknowledging, not eliminating, the imperfections. The expanded service is going to be the character finding their true purpose, not by becoming flawless, but by using their flaws to help others. Their service expands beyond the mundane and becomes a sacred mission of empathy and understanding. They use their unique experience with the suffering to guide others who feel exiled or broken themselves. The voice here speaks from the heart of the wilderness, a place of pain and isolation. And it's raw, compassionate, and it's truthful. It resonates with those still searching for meaning in their own struggles. The character becomes a living testament to the idea that the greatest expansion of wisdom comes not for striving for an impossible idea, but from accepting and integrating one's deepest wounds. And then finally, I got Lilith the Sovereign, Chiron square Pluto in the 10th. Lilith the Sovereign describes a painful but transformative journey of reclaiming authority and power in the public sphere. This is not a simple ascent to power, but a brutal, often public, reckoning with deep-seated wounds, being Chiron, and controlling obsessive power dynamics, being Pluto, related to the career and reputation, being the 10th house. The story of Lilith the Sovereign is the process of a character once ostracized for their authenticity, integrating their deepest vulnerabilities with their most potent strengths. Now, the archetypal wound and the public stage. The story begins with the character being the archetypal wound in the public stage. The story is a modern-day Lilith bearing a profound, unhealed wound, Chiron in the 10th house. This wound is rooted in their professional identity and public image, stemming from an early life rejection or public shaming related to their ambition or role. This makes them deeply sensitive to public perception and authority. These are people that are all about their public image. This core insecurity is a constant aggressive conflict, square, with a powerful obsessive and controlling energy, being Pluto. The initial struggle is marked by power struggles, an intense public scrutiny, and a deep-seated fear of being exposed or humiliated. This might manifest as experiencing darkness in power, from supervisors or a constant feeling of being under siege in their career. The path of compromise, initially, the character is going to feel the character might overcompensate for their wound, seeking public validation through conventional means. They may become addicted to social recognition to soothe their unhealed ego. However, this path is ultimately unfulfilling and inauthentic, forcing them towards a more intense Plutonian transformation. They are brutal. The descent and reclamation. The moment of crisis is going to be the catalyst for becoming Lilith the Sovereign. This arrives when the conventional path crumbles under the immense internal pressures of the Chiron-Pluto square placing. With the public downfall, this is a sudden catastrophic event, a public scandal, a professional betrayal, or a forced departure. Kind of like when people start turning on one another to save face. This exposes the character's vulnerabilities and forces a reckoning with their past. This is the symbolic descent into the underworld, being Pluto. A necessary journey for the authentic transformation or completion of contract. The power of a deep psyche. In the depths of this public humiliation, the character confronts the shadow aspects of their power, being Pluto. They recognize that their obsessive need for control and the deep fear of shame are not the ultimate truth, but rather projections of their unhealed wounds. The rebirth of power, emerging from this symbolic death, only happens when the character sheds their attachments for external validation and begins to wield their power from a place of radical authenticity. Now the wound, being Chiron, is no longer a source of shame, but a wellspring of profound wisdom and empathy, which they channel into a new form of authority. Now Lilith's sovereignty. The character's final transformation is the achievement of genuine sovereignty, a power that comes from self-acceptance and a deep integration of the wounds. This is leading with empathy. Lilith, the sovereign, does not lead with a tyrannical fist, but with a profound understanding of the human condition. Her experiences of pain and public rejection allow her to see and heal the collective wounds of others in a professional context. This is its self-sabotaging behavior, where we're destroying other people and derailing others off their path in order to progress or save face or work on self. True Lilith sovereignty is embodied with empowering others, not just self. A new form of authority is going to be born under these rules. The character is going to create a new authentic form of leadership that does not require submission or external validation. Her power is not conventional, but based on a raw, transformative, and deeply honest connection with her own truth. Her public presence is no longer defined by how she is perceived, but by who she is unapologetically. The Queen of the Shadows. Through embracing the shadow self and the wounds that were once considered shameful, the character becomes a guide for others in their own journeys of healing and empowerment. She proves that true sovereignty is not about being flawless, but about embracing one's own complex and magnificent wholeness. The modern-day Lilith, bearing a profound unhealing wound, man or woman, it's not always necessarily female in these energies. Chiron is the 10th. In the 10th, this wound is rooted in their professional identity and public image, stemming from an early life rejection or public shaming related to their ambition or role. It's like applying for a job and not getting it, and then destroying your entire life perpetually, progressing, leading with malice and hate due to that one rejection. This makes them deeply sensitive to public perception and authority. Now, the core insecurity is a constant, aggressive conflict, being square, with a powerful, obsessive, and controlling energy, being Pluto. The initial struggle, Jesus. The character's journey is marked by power struggles, intense public scrutiny, and deep-seated fear of being exposed to humiliation. I already read that. This might be, yep. So the descent and the reclamation, sorry guys, I was screwing up. Now the moment of crisis is going to be the catalyst for becoming, I read that one too, didn't I? Yep. Hold on. Yep. I love when I lose myself in my own script. Apologize about that, guys. That was the end of it. The Queen of the Shadows was the last part of that story. So hopefully you guys found this entertaining. I'll see you in the next one. Hopefully I don't make as many mistakes. Good Lord.